welcome to another edition of Paterno Presser here at AltoonaMirror.com. Cory, Geiger, Neil, Rudel. Tough loss on Saturday, 24-7 to Ohio State. Joe, pretty serious today. Not really joking around with anybody. He came in, it was a very short question and answer session. He basically just said that Ohio State played better than them, had more speed, they were quicker. What did you think of what Joe had to say today?
Pretty uneventful, trying to underline that they still have some opportunities, decent opportunities ahead of them. I think you could sense the disappointment. The one thing that struck me is he's, now questioning some of their special teams, which everybody's been focusing on for a couple days. He's defending the way they coach it. That was pretty clear. Even saying that they never really designated one guy throughout most of his career, which I thought that Tom Bradley did most of it before he was promoted to a different position. And he's also saying maybe they redshirted people that they shouldn't have. But he's questioning their personnel, not the scheme in which they manage the special teams.
Now, you look at the big picture, okay? I don't think anyone thought that this was going to be a great team coming into the season. A lot of people picked 10-2, 11-1, or whatever. But what I find interesting is that once they got to number 4 in the country, whether you thought they were a great team or not, pretty irrelevant to me, because at that point, you're in position. It was just like last year when they were number 3 when they lost to Iowa. Once you're number 4, expectations get to such a high level that when you lose home games to Iowa and Ohio State, it's just incredibly deflating to everyone.
Yeah, but that's what they've kind of created here with this stadium. The facilities they have. I really believe that there's nobody in the country that has better facilities and better tradition that has laid more eggs in the last 10 to 15 years than Penn State on a national stage. They can get to 9-4 and 10-2, and they got there in 2005 with a one-loss season, and last year. But generally, they've come up short in more key situations than they haven't, and I think that's disappointing.
Now,
we all thought they were going to lose a couple games. I think it's how they lose that has been particularly deflating.
The million-dollar question is why? That's a pretty bold statement that nobody in the country has laid more eggs for a decade.
That has what they have.
Right. So why has that been the case? Is it just bad coaching? Is it bad execution? Is it the players are overrated? What kinds of things do you pin it on?
I think it's a combination of all three, and not to cop out, but I don't think consistently offensively they match what other teams are doing. Like even Saturday, what could they have done to slow down that Ohio State rush? Clearly, Ohio State has great defense, but is it a great enough defense that they should have shut Penn State out in the second half? Shut Penn State out after that first score, which they barely got in. And I question that. There's clearly been a de-emphasis on special teams. Whether he says, even admitted that they didn't spend as much time lately as they maybe used to. So I think he's kind of getting around to admitting that. And, you have the product of a guy who's way past his prime. Period.
I want to mention a couple of quotes that came out in this press conference that to me were just fascinating. Joe said 8-2 isn't a disaster. Okay, well, that's fine. 8-2 is not a disaster. This program isn't collapsed or anything. This isn't the return to the dark years. But 8-2, when you haven't beaten anybody and your best win is Temple, and you really did lay an egg at home in 2 games that you were favored to win, why is that not a disaster?
Well, I think he's in damage control mode. And I know you wrote that it's a failure, and I think in a lot of ways they certainly failed in their biggest games, on their biggest stages. If they can go finish 10-2, they could still finish actually 11-2, maybe beat a decent team in LSU. Yeah, I think. Can you say it's a success? Not necessarily, but is a failure? Not necessarily. If they can run the table and play somebody decent and possibly still a BCS game.
Sure.
So, I think he's just in damage control mode.
BCS is still a possibility. Penn State 18th in the BCS right now. You have to finish in the top 14 to be considered for at-large possibility. They're 18th. They need some help. They need to win out. They need some teams in front of them to lose, and there are some teams in front of them that still have some tough games left. So they could still possibly get into that top 14 and get to a BCS game. If not, probably looking at LSU perhaps in the Capital One Bowl. So that would be a good opponent. One other interesting comment today. Josh Hull said, we have everything in place here to play for a national championship. And I thought that was a really good comment by a senior who has worked his butt off to be in position to play, a former walk-on. A real good stand-up comment by Josh Hull. Would you agree with that they do have everything in place to be in position to contend for a national championship every year?
I think, I don't know that the development of their line every year is in a position to compete where they have to compete. I think they've kind of proven that offensively. Obviously Saturday night where they were pretty much overpowered. But I think generally, they have all the parts in place here to be competitive. And I think that's why it is such a letdown when they do lose, and particularly when they lose because of some of the ways they have lost through special teams, not being able to move the ball and just relying so much on their defense that they, one bad play or two and they ultimately crack, and then kind of the roof. But as far as disaster comment, we've all lived through the early part of the decade when they were losing to Illinois and they were losing to Purdue and they were losing obviously to Iowa that they still can't beat. So it's not quite what it is then. Now Michigan is not what they used to be either, so that's not a great win anymore, but they still did go to Michigan.
Well, it's an interesting few days following a loss like this because there's so much passion for Penn State, and that's what's so great about the program. But because there's so much passion, when they have a loss like this, it is just such a huge deflationary component. I mean, everybody goes off the deep end complaining about various things. Now there is a game this weekend, Indiana, Senior Day. Yeah, so let's talk about this week's game.
Who are they playing?
Yeah, what kind of score do you have? Because Indiana can score a little bit. You do have a little bit of the factor. Jerome Hayes did say, we don't want Ohio State to beat us twice, meaning that you still have to show up and play this week. So how do you see this week?
Well, I mean, like I said last week and on the Nitwits, I made one of the worst picks of my whole career last week by saying Penn State was going to win by 17 points. So I formally fall on my sword over that. I'm the dunce of the week for that pick. So I really openly have no idea. And I don't have a ton of faith right now that they're going to come out and play great. I think they will win. I picked a 24-14, but I don't want to operate with the blind faith that they'll just come out here and blow Indiana out. It'll probably be more high scoring than I picked because Indiana can score, but I think Penn State will suck it up and play a defensive game, try to reestablish their run, and win the game by about 10.
And I'm going to go a little higher. I'm going to go Penn State 31, Indiana 17. I think Penn State's offense will get some things going. Indiana doesn't have a great defense. Some of the things we wish we would have seen against Ohio State with some offensive creativity, we may see a little bit this weekend. So
Penn State is usually very good on Senior Day. They'll shake off this loss, I would think, and at least come up with an emotional effort.
That's Neil Rudel. I'm Cory Geiger. Thanks so much for tuning in all season. We'll be here one more time next week, and then also for some of the bowl preparation here with our Paterno Presser at altoonamere.com.